the society, and it became the topic of discussion at the National Council of Reform. We have been attracting your attention to the Bill 2490 for a long period of time. This draft law was discussed at the National Council of Reforms last week, and we decided to ask for the opinion for our experts. On Friday, the parliamentary committee sitting is scheduled, and this committee is responsible for preparation of this draft law for second reading in the parliament, after which the passage will take place. And for this discussion, we will be able to invite all the experts, representatives of the government, presidential administration, etc. As of today, we are able to hear the opinion of experts. Denis is one of the most active participants of drafting process. Good afternoon. I'm very happy with what happened on Friday, because this has brought the draft law to the center of attention of the entire society. We cannot keep quiet about the situation in this sphere. Jointly with the Reanimation Package of Reform, we have made a statement. You can easily find it in the internet. And in that statement, we said that the draft law, which was developed with the participation of national and international experts, it already contains everything all necessary novelties for the reform of the civil service of Ukraine. I will just make a very small quotation. The draft law takes into account international experience and public administration practice used in the EU and OECD countries. It also suggests efficient solutions for the problems in the civil service in Ukraine. In particular, it clearly distinguishes between political positions and civil servants' positions, and offers clear procedure for career development and merit-based fees and salaries. This is the position, and this is the opinion of experts, including European experts, about the draft law, which we submitted. We believe that any further working groups and commissions developing new draft laws will actually do the same, but 6 months later. Of course, we understand that the drafting function and discussion and passage of the law, this is the role of the parliament, but we had developed this absolutely innovative approach to the civil service, and now this is jeopardized. Any draft law in this sphere will bring on the surface again the main 5 things which are clearly reflected in our bill, and which are based on the European approach, and any European any further drafting group will do actually the same. There are no other scenarios and options. Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. Who you are? I'm Danylo Pasko, member of the National Council of Reform, co-founder of the Initiative Professional Government. As a participant of that event on Friday at the National Council of Reform, I would like to rebuke the idea which was reflected in the article and which distorted position of the president. So in result of the discussion, the decision was made to first of all, the president did not attempt to put this draft law under question. The second is that this is one of the major reforms without which no further reforms in Ukraine are not possible, and this is the foundation for fighting corruption on the account of the professionalism of civil servants and on the account of transparency and publicity of the competitions for filling in the position. And the third statement is that they should have decent salaries. Unfortunately, in the current law, this last element is lacking, and we insist that the problem of decent salaries of the civil servants should be resolved, and experts present here today have some suggestions how this could be done. Good afternoon, I'm Oleksiy Ryabchin. I'm a member of Parliament, Batkivshchina faction. I'm representing the Donetsk region in the Parliament of Ukraine, and I'm representing Euro-optimists group. I am a participant of the Energy Saving Committee, and I will explain why I am here today. First of all, chairman of the committee and Batkivshchina faction in general, they are Sergiy Vlasenko. They should be the main supporters of this law in the parliament, and yesterday he explained to me that on Thursday the committee will have a sitting, and if all the committee members, a sufficient number of committee members would be present in the parliament on in the committee sitting on Thursday, they will be able to introduce all the changes. Also, sub-chairman of the vice-chairman of the committee, Alena Shkrum, is one of the big contributors to this law. And she is a big activist in preparation of this draft law. We believe that the draft law has a bit trade-off nature, and this is the best possible version of the law. The committee will decide which changes will be made or not. The Parliament will decide. I believe that the formulation which was mentioned today is incorrect. I have doubts that the president was familiarized with all the changes. Probably there was some sort of manipulation. Who should be brought responsible for the situation when we try to hesitate in implementing important reforms. I think that we should find who are these people who try to manipulate with this bill. Let's mention their names. If somebody wishes to bring the new alternative version of the draft law, if somebody wishes to get additional finance, let's mention these names. Participants of the Euro-optimist group had immediately responded to the mentioned statement. In late spring, we met with the activists, and these experts, they invited us to initiate this draft law. The Cabinet of Ministers was preparing its draft law, and we had been waiting for 2 months until the Cabinet of Ministers submitted its draft law. There were interested stakeholders who implemented their wishes. What further working groups we need, it's a secret for me. For me, this draft law is important. When I was a student in the United Kingdom, and I was studying the public management of innovations, and out of 100 students, these were seconded students, students from the government, and they had to go back. They had to go back to the country and used as civil servants. Unfortunately, after coming back to Ukraine, I was unable to find my position in the civil service. Today, the situation has changed. I know a lot of people who came back from abroad and took rather high positions in the ministries and in responsible positions, trying to change the country. I wish that young people will be willing to go to civil service, and that young people who get brilliant education would be willing to go to civil service. In order to do this, we need to provide decent salaries. We need to preserve institutional money in the state institution. For me, this draft law is not the ideal version. We should discuss it. But unfortunately, there are a lot of political flaws, and and there is the risk. I think that there is a risk that positive changes to the law will be not adopted, and the law will be distorted. The draft law will be distorted, and in this case, we will publicly mention those people who negatively will influence the law. That's why I appeal to cooperation between the power, between public administration and representatives of public administration and the parliament.
Couple words for myself. Viktor Tymoshchuyk, Deputy Head of the Center for Political and Legal Reforms, an expert from RPR. I'd like to bring you back to 20 years when Viktor Yanukovych was not among our horror scapegoats on the national level, and one of the conditions for his nomination to prime ministerial position was to get rid of ministerial state secretary positions. And in the period of 2001-2003, it was that will and that desire of absolute power at the ministerial level that was among his key requirements to premier ministerial position. And again in 2005, when cardinal change of governments took place, 75% of civil servants of first and second categories were changed. Again, when we had changes from orange government to blue and white and vice versa, we had similar changes to the extent that now we see that the government is unable to get people back to their office. And because of that, for us dealing with the civil service reform for many years, it is clear how important issues of governmental abuse are, and these are at par with matters of corruption. On one hand, we see old-timers and even young politicians quite used to exist in that old-time system. I mean those peoples who are eagerly and willingly selling offices. And there are also politicians or political nominees who consciously want to be unilateral deciders of destinies of others. Well, it is clear that it is not possible to have a viable system with someone unilaterally deciding about, say, about the whole ministry. So the first problem, in my view, well, there are potential compromises and decisions, but the key problem is that politicians are really afraid of competitive selection to civil service positions. The commission, the selection commission, will also feature those same politicians from presidential administration, from the cabinet, from all the parliamentary factions. I think, by the way, there should be representatives of all the factions in the parliament, given the unstable coalition that we have. So for the sake of stability of civil service, it would be better to have a compromise like that. And I think neither the president nor the prime minister should fear losing control over the commission. Second question is nomination to positions on municipal state administrations. And there is a kind of a constitutional language in the provision, because the bill goes against the constitution, whereby it is said that the cabinet of ministers shall nominate people to municipal administrations. Ministers want to continue with their powers of nomination of structural unit heads. Still, if the bill is ever made into the law, some standstill period of up to 6 months will be necessary. And further on implementation of this would-be law will require up to 9 months, which brings at least a year or a year and a half of standstill. Nevertheless, we need to embrace European standards, and a strong problem remains, which is about political affiliation or partisanship. I think that we should ban civil servants from being members of political parties in Ukraine to avoid them being used as administrative resource at regular elections, etc. There are different opinions on that in Europe, and the expert group developed some of its recommendations with a view of applicable European experience. I'm telling this to say that there can be compromises and can be acceptable decisions made, but we really need to hear clear positions of the President and the Prime Minister. And I think presidential reaction on Friday showed some sign of him being manipulated. The Prime Minister acts strangely at all because he has never mentioned this bill as a necessary and priority one for a year and a half. Maybe he does not want this law. Volodymyr Kupri, I represent the Civil Society Forum of Eastern Partnership, an organization that joins NGOs from the European Union and from Eastern Partnership countries. One of the focuses of our activities was the reform of the public administration sector and of the civil service. And as a frequent participant of many events organized on that topic, also at the level of the European Union, this bill we are discussing today was one of the few ones that was really endorsed and approved by European communities, and it was one of the few bills that allowed us to feel proud with our reform efforts. It is probably one of the few documents as well about which we can say that a certain consensus between the governmental developers and the expert community was reached, because it was really the common brainchild of these two groups, and it was a welcome child for both of them. And it's really strange to hear some people saying about EU's negative reaction to the draft legislation. Sigma, in its analysis, clearly stated that it does comply with key principles of public administration and civil service in line with applicable EU practices. And if the government, if the coalition, and those authorized to shape national policies come back to their senses, they need to remember their responsibilities and obligations. The coalition did promise this bill be adopted last autumn. The government promised to have it approved this spring. There was a huge expert group chaired by Alena Shkrum, an MP, to processed more than 1,000 corrections and changes to the document. By not adopting this law, we'll risk losing trust and belief of the European community and expert community as well. Lack of trust to those who really represent the decision-making sector in this country. And we, as one of the voices in the Eastern Partnership, we ultimately demand final decision made in the fate of this law, because there is no limit to improvements, and any procedure can either bring improvements or be the third nail in the coffin. And given all the corrections suggested, the only thing that remains absent is the political will to finally make this law come to the parliament for voting. A little correction. There is no draft bill with changes and corrections approved that could be submitted for the second hearing in the parliament. And hopefully we are going to have the document after this Friday, just for the sake of being clear with our formulations. I'd like to remind you, by the way, colleagues, that tomorrow at 4 p.m. we are going to have better, more in-depth discussion featuring representatives of the Cabinet of Ministers and the Presidential Administration. And Alex correctly mentioned it, the need to clarify positions of individual institutions and their representatives. Most probably we are going to have wider range of opinions expressed tomorrow morning. Sergiy, Soroka. I represent a civil platform, New Country. When we were working on this draft legislation, we envisaged that the salaries will be increased due to optimization of personnel strength, due to optimization of the hierarchy of institutions. There were pre-agreements made with the Ministry of Finance to the effect that the payroll at central bodies of the executive will remain the same even after personnel optimization. And that would allow us, by having optimized the governmental structure 20 to 40%, we would have the payroll retained, and thus it would allow us paying better salaries to those who would continue working. And surely there were some objections from ministers about the procedure risking to be quite a long one. But here we would cite Czech experience. Having adopted relevant legislation, they spent 1 year to reassess performance of civil servants in this country. And we suggested similar model of having 6 months to carry reappraisal of performance of heads of structural units, and 1 more year to carry out assessment of civil servants on other positions. There are 3 fundamental, very reformist pieces of legislation in Ukraine: the one on fiscal system, the one on judicial system, and the one on civil service. And unfortunately, all 3 of these linger in unending debates, though the coalition agreement has it that these are priority lines of cooperation and relevant legislative acts have to be adopted this year exactly. Nevertheless, no one knows when and how we are going to reform our judiciary, our fiscal service, and we will do our best to see this legislation on civil service being adopted, maybe this month or next month, but still after the Friday reactions to the draft legislation, we have mounting doubts as to whether it will really happen despite all our attempts. And now I'd like to give the floor to the chief professional on the topic. Good afternoon, Igor Koliushko, head of the managing board of the Center for Political and Legal Reforms. A couple of words to those of my colleagues, just to explain you why this draft legislation is so important. For Ukraine to develop, it first of all needs a business environment comfortable for investments from either domestic investors or foreign investors. The most important thing for any investor coming to a country is the stable nature of business environment, of the legislation in the country, of the rules of the game, actually. And when individual politicians and some civic activists say today how unimportant the civil service is because it's a lengthy procedure, and when we hear people voting for quick sackings, quick reforms, say of an optimization of the tax system, I want to tell them that if you have something changed in a hasty way today, you can reasonably expect another hasty change of it tomorrow. Positive changes may happen today and tomorrow, the day after tomorrow. But these very hasty decisions, they ultimately kill our investment attractiveness, investment climate, and our growth potential. this is a prerequisite to see reforms going steadily forward. The prerequisite is to the institutional reforms and the reforms of the government. What we see in reality, that despite wide agreements to the need of decentralization reform, about countrywide comprehension of the need to have more citizens directly involved in the management of their own matters at the local level, because no government in any capital will be able to do it from the center. Yet still, a rather nice piece of legislation on decentralization, I mean the one on making changes to the constitution in this respect, was stopped just days before motioned to the parliament, and then it was again stopped because of ongoing negotiations on the execution of Minsk agreements. And now there is the situation when the parliament may have no 300 voices to vote this draft legislation into law. Another block of reforms, which is about the reform of the public administration, the whole executive and the cabinet. Yes, we had consensus, we had agreements with every stakeholder. We said that the law on civil service will be approved first of all. And there were some little discussions about minor things like payroll, thresholds, transparency thresholds of competition, and etc. And today we hear a surprise statement of the president that this draft legislation needs to be revoked and the whole work should start again from scratch. Then we have a third reform component, the one on judiciary, because it ultimately shapes country's growth potential. And we also see an ongoing desire and intention to retain the old levers of influence for the presidential administration, those that have been retained since the time of Yanukovych, which concern presidential capacity to move or transfer judges from one court to another, at times in favor of some specific decisions made. We do not know who does it, who is behind it. We know some statements from presidential administration guys like Filatov, Kovalchuk, Danylo, but it remains to be seen whether it is their own initiative and vision or they do it on commission of the president. But ultimately, it is not of importance for the Ukrainian nation, because we see that the three priority reform lines have been stalled, and these are within the responsibility of the president. And because of that, we need to address the president directly with a very specific question. I could possibly agree that the current situation with the draft law on civil service is just some sort of misunderstanding, and in this case we are ready to help them understand and correct this misunderstanding. But if this is not a misunderstanding, then it happens clearly that there is a very dedicated cause to curb institutional reforms related to decentralization and transparency in the executive and independence of the judiciary brewing somewhere inside the government. That is, we see the cause to further concentrate power in the hands of those working in that presidential administration. And we all know how things like that eventually end. And because of that, I think we need to be very concerned about it. And this, our appearance today, will be just one of the many that we are going to have on different platforms and different events, because it's a matter of principle already. If it is about backtracking in governmental public policies on matters of civil service reform, This means that all institutional reforms will be stalled and put on hold here in the country. What we see now is some individual nominees mushrooming here and there just to show how incapable they are and go into oblivion.
Dear colleagues, I would like to mention that at the National Council of Reforms, the position which you mentioned was supported by representatives of all branches of powers, including Mr. Groisman. So it looks like what you mentioned, it's true. We have time for a couple of questions. Андрей Уманец, экономические известия, интернет-портал. Dennis, please mention the source of quotation and what were the arguments of the president. The quotation is published on the official website of the European delegation of Euro-Commission in Ukraine. So the website of the European delegation in Ukraine, chaired by Mr. Tambinsky. This is official position of the European Commission on this draft law. I'm not trying to distort this position. For us, it's not a surprise. And this position remains the same. Our position remains the same. From the very beginning, we agreed about the principles. We actually have made the mirror from the draft law, and we provided this draft law to the Cabinet of Ministers. Then this draft law went to the first reading. Okay. Members of parliament, they filtered the changes which tried to distort the first the draft law of the first reading, and up to now we managed to preserve the integrity of this law and its compliance with the European level. And what happened to the National Council sitting, I will give the floor to Danylo Pasko. You can find on Facebook in my post in Valera Pekar, where we described what happened at the National Council of Reform. Very briefly, there was a statement made that the European Union does not support this draft law. This was mentioned by the president. Why he said so, I do not know. Whether he was wrongly informed or he made a mistake expressing his opinion, or I do not know. I think that official statement and official position provided by the European Union side is very clear today. Then Mr. Groisman, who very actively participated in drafting, especially in the first version. Mr. Groisman mentioned that as of today, the draft law is not of full quality because in the Cabinet of Ministers, the first version was slightly changed. Then Danylo took the floor and mentioned that he had been participating in the civil service reform since 2010, and that in this draft law there is the model which has lost its topicality today because it is very of very static nature, so to say. And then there were doubts who is the leader of this version of the law representing the Cabinet of Ministers. Actually, in that room, there were no proactive supporters of this version able to support it. Although after that sitting, Shimkev in his post on Facebook expressed counter arguments, and that the European Union had some comments on the concept or to the strategy, but not to the text of the law, and that this was the mistake, the source of misunderstanding expressed by the president. Probably now this misunderstanding is already resolved because of the official position of the EU. I was slightly surprised to hear position of Mr. Groisman. When Mr. Groisman used to be the minister of regional building, he invited me to participate in this discussions on the law. During the first reading, his representatives were always side to us, and by the first reading was the first reading happened due to the professionalism of our speaker, of Vladimir Groisman, and I recognize that the draft law after the Cabinet of Ministers became worse, and that there are all changes made by which can restore this draft law after its own changes introduced by the Cabinet of Ministers. And I would like to clarify, we still do not have the final version of the law before the second reading. We are currently discussing the draft law after first reading with the changes suggested by the members of parliament. I believe that final discussion whether this will be good or bad law will be possible after Friday. I want to hear a professional discussion in the parliament about the law. I'm tired to hear, I'm sick and tired to hear that you have to pass this or that law because we need the IMF money, or please do not pass this law because the EU does not like it. Let us discuss the laws from the point of view. This is good for Ukraine. We want to hear some different arguments, except instead of let us not pass this law because Europe doesn't like it. The draft law was developed by official working group represented by the members of parliament and experts, up to 70 people. Probably we should not say that for 4 months this group was simply wasting its time. I think we should trust this working group and not try to review all the changes. During our work, we had a possibility to discuss all the aspects, and now members of parliament try to review these reviews. They try to bring the compromise. Let us preserve the civil servant status to the National Institute of Strategic Reforms. Let us preserve for them the status of civil servants. Each member of parliament will bear political responsibility as a member of parliament. I will vote and bear my political responsibility despite all the developments suggested by experts, and if members of parliament believe that compromise is necessary. You also should trust the colleagues in the parliamentary committee. Denise, I suggest to stop now this discussion and to continue it tomorrow. There is such an expression which says that without unhappiness you cannot be happy, and I believe that events which happened at the end of last week, they will make a new push up for the reform. And thank you, dear colleagues, for your attention. And in some 10 minutes, we will discuss another reform. This will be discussion about the pension reform.